at the land that we have, it has to cater for our needs in terms of recreation, housing, agriculture, any commercial interests, and somehow you need to sort of work out how all of that is accommodated, right? So again, with economics, it's what's available to us and how people choose, based on the alternatives that they have. Why do you go for a red t-shirt over the green one? Okay, why not the t-shirt but the shirt type of thing? Okay. So it is a social science because it deals with human behavior, and it uses as much as possible. So depending on what's available, we use as much as possible. So you would have to do your investigation in a scientific approach. I'm just gonna ask you to admit people who joined the class. I had asked Mino Lutando to remove the lobby. I'll just have to sit with her and make sure she does it because now she set the appointments. I can't remove the lobby, but I know she can. Okay, so we have, like I already said, scarce resources, and choices have to be made by individuals, by businesses, and by government units. So in economics, we look at microeconomics and macroeconomics. And like I said, I'm just going to run through this quick because this is something you already know. So this is like a recap. So with microeconomics, we're dealing with very specific type of economy with zoom in area. So choices that are made by individual decision making and the consumers and maybe firms. So if we were to look at South Africa versus this Johannesburg, um, the view of Johannesburg would be at a micro level, and then the entire country would be at a macro level. So whatever decisions are made at a level of Johannesburg would be a lot more specific, a lot more individualized for this Johannesburg, as opposed to decisions that are made, say, at central government that would have to cater for an entire country. And if you look at Gauteng as a province versus the Northwest, very, very different. Okay. So microeconomics looks at why goods are valued differently. How individuals will make financial decisions, how they trade, how they coordinate. So it is very much involved with economics at a micro level. So, when you think microscope, to take a microscope and you'd be looking at something small. So that's what it is. So it occurs within the dynamics of supply and demand, supply and demand within that specific area, or for a specific good, so it would also look at how individuals or people on a smaller scale would approach risk and uncertainty. How do they deal with it? What do they want? And in macroeconomics, I think in explaining micro, I was already explaining macros, that branch of economics that focuses on the impact of choices on the total or aggregate level of economic activity. And then it studies the behavior and performance of an economy as a whole. So if you were thinking global economy versus South Africa, obviously South Africa would now look like it's at a micro level, whereas global would be macro. So it's always, how do I put it? It's relative, so when you say micro or macro, relative to what? So I did make the assumption of South Africa versus, even it would be the country versus the province, and then the province would be micro, and then the country would be at a macro level. And then if we look at the province and we say, okay, Gauteng as a whole versus the city of Joburg, obviously the city of Joburg would be your micro level. But even as you look at the city of Joburg, then you start looking at the different councils within Johannesburg, So, for instance, what will work in Soweto is not necessarily what will work in Bryanston, type of thing. So again, at a macro level, you can look at Johannesburg, but it's made up of different parts and you would work on an aggregate. But if you were to zoom into one particular area, then you would be looking at it at a microeconomic level. Okay. So with macroeconomics, we look at recurrent economic cycles and broad economic growth. So when we look at economic growth, we look at it at a broader level, whereas at a micro level, you would zoom into a specific area or a specific types. So macroeconomics would look at your foreign trade, government, fiscal. So fiscal speaks to public funds. So when we say the fiscus, we refer to public funds. Fiscal committee or whatever it is, like we're going to have a budget speech soon, and that is a fiscal decisions being made at government level. The Minister of Finance will tell us just how much money the country has, how much they're going to borrow, how much goes where. So, that like infrastructure, this, that, and the other. So macroeconomics would look at that. And then it also looks at monetary policy. So monetary policy is governed by the Monetary Committee, which is, I think the chairperson is the governor of the Reserve Bank. So they're, with government fiscal, they're looking at social development, right? And then with, apologies, my work phone is still on. With monetary policy, I think you would have done economics at some point, and they will tell you that they target inflation. So every quarter they sit and then they will make an announcement with their repo rate. This is how much it is. And then we know whether it's easier to access loans from banks or not because of the interest rates. It also looks at unemployment rates. At a micro level, you can look at unemployment rates, but for an area, for a specific area. So at macroeconomics, so when they say South Africa has a 32% unemployment levels, and then they will tell you it's a lot higher. However, some people are no longer physically looking, they've given up, type of thing. So that is at a macro level. Okay. Level of inflation, interest rates, growth of total production output, business cycles, whether they result in expansions, recessions, booms, and depressions. Okay. So these patterns that they follow, those recurrent patterns, are used to inform economic policies and economic strategies. So in terms of what strategy the country is taking, what policies they need to implement, economic policies, they would have looked at such patterns. Because I'm in presentation mode and I mostly can't see hands, if you have a question, please just speak up. I will not consider you rude. If you raise your hand, I will not be able to see. Okay. It may notify me that there's a hand, but it means I have to go back and look at the list and all of that. So yeah. So the idea behind economics is that it sort of tries to explain how and why we make the purchasing choices we do. So you have the four economic key concepts: scarcity, demand and supply, costs and benefits, and then incentives. So we're just going to look at those. I did say that we have limited resources, and these limited resources have to meet seemingly unlimited ones. So think about your need for transportation. So I live in Joburg South, I work in the CBD, right? I need to get to work at 8 in the morning. The need is for me to get to work, right? So I could cycle to work, I could drive, I could take the bus, right? That's the need. I need to get to work, so I need some mode of transport. There's no train, so the train is out of bounds for me. There's not even a railway line where I live. So there is the metro buses, and then there's taxis, and there's the option of my own car. So how I get to work is mostly one. So I could just decide, okay, the bus travels at different intervals, right? So I think the first one passes around 6, and then the next one will pass around 7, and then it goes from here into Rosettenville and then a few places. So it will take longer. So I may get to work late if I take the bus. So I decide I will not take the bus, maybe a taxi, because then once it's full, then we're ready to go. We get into the city and then, Um, but sometimes it takes too long to fill up. And maybe now I waste time sitting at the taxi rank waiting for the taxi to get full so that we can move. So again, it doesn't quite meet my needs. So like, okay, fine, it's better if I just drive my own car. I can leave at the time I want from my house to my office. It's about 12 minutes drive. And this is not me speeding. It's not far. So now, okay, we've decided a car is fine. Any car will get me to work. But then people are very particular about the cars they drive. Okay. So an i10 will take you from point A to point B in the same way a Lamborghini will. If the need is to get to point B, any car will take you there. All right. However, you may not want to be in an i10. You may want to arrive there in style. This is why we speak of unlimited ones. Um, so the whole idea with this resources being scarce, we now look at an efficient way of making sure that we can allocate the resources so that most needs are fulfilled, and that highest priorities are met. If your need is a need for housing, 4 walls with a roof, that's shelter. But if you look at the different types of houses, you're not the top billing generation. I will tell you about top billing. There's a program, I think it's on DSTV somewhere, where they sell houses and they show these luxury houses. At the end of the day, it's a house. People live there. They wake up in the morning, they go to work. So it provides the same thing, shelter. But some people will be okay with a 2 bedroom. Some people will want 7 bedrooms. And this must all happen from a place of limited resources. So like I said, we only have so much land, so many factories, so much oil, so many people, but our wants and our desires for things are unlimited. With those resources that we have unlimited ones. Sorry, this should have been switched off. Doesn't seem like I did. Okay, so then we look at supply and demand, which determines, or at least it helps us predict market conditions. For those who did introduction to construction economics last year, you would know that the law of demand and the law of supply, when something is in limited supply, it becomes expensive, right? Because there's very few of it, and then there's more people wanting it. But when you have a lot of it, I'll make the example with cherries. So I don't know how many of you love cherries. They're usually very expensive. I think it's the season for cherries now. Yeah, they're available. They're usually very expensive because there's more demand than there is supply for them. So you find that the harvest is not good. So you struggle to find them. You'll find them, say, at Woolies, and sometimes some Pick n Pays and some Checker stores will have it. However, this year it seems the harvest has been good. The prices are not that bad, and you can actually buy cherries. Similar thing happens with grapes. There's a time when we can all access grapes, and then as they move out of season, then they hike up the price because there's limited supply of it and there's more of us wanting it. Okay. And generally, when the price of something increases, if the price just increases, the demand for it will drop. And here, when we speak about demand, we speak about when somebody wants something and is able to buy it. Me wanting a Lamborghini that I can afford count as demand. So if that company was thinking how many Lamborghinis should we make, they would look at in this area how many people would want and be able to afford a Lamborghini, and that's how they would measure the demand. Not just, I mean, we all want it. Okay, let me not say all, but a lot of people would want a sport car. But how many of us are able and willing to buy it? Okay, so again, when you look at something and you think, I want to increase the price, chances are there'll be less people buying it because of the price increase, right? Again, when something becomes, let's say there's still a demand for it, but then it becomes limited in supply. So an example would be when COVID hit in 2020, those who were running construction projects, we order a lot of our material from China. So for instance, roofing material, you've spoken to a supplier, I'm going to need roofing material in November. You speak to them in February, like, no, it's fine. However, in March, then we experienced this shutdown. And because of the shutdown, China is also not exporting or importing anything. They've closed down as well, so we can't get the roof. The suppliers who still have this type of roof in stock and had not sold it now realize that there's a demand for what we have and it's coming in short supply. Prices skyrocket because now there's more people competing for one thing, or for a few things. And it almost becomes who can afford it, an affordability thing. So again, that's on supply and demand, and supply would describe how many units of a particular good are available in any given economy, and demand describes how many units of that good people in the market want to buy or can buy. I think want to buy is not the correct way to phrase it. It's how many of them can buy, how many are able, willing and able. So you can't just be willing, you must be willing and able. And wanting is just a willingness, but an ability. I mean, if you think about it, I'm willing to run. Am I able to run? It's a completely different conversation. Okay. So the law of demand says that as a price of a good or a service rises, the demand for it will decrease, sorry. So if the price increases, the demand for it will decrease. And that's from an affordability perspective. If I could get an avocado for 1 rand, and then tomorrow when I come, it's now 1 rand 50, I may decide, oh, no, I'm going to go back home because now I had 2 rand, I was going to buy 2 avocados and I would give my child one and eat one, but now I can't, we can only buy one. So maybe let me rather buy oranges, So as the price decreases, the quantity of demand will increase. So when it becomes cheaper, as the price decreases, it becomes a lot more accessible. A lot more people can access it. So remember what I said about demand, not it just being a willingness, but willingness and an ability to buy. With supply, when a price increase, then sellers want to produce more of that thing, more of that good that they can sell for more money. So for instance, if suddenly people want, I don't know, ceramic teaspoons as opposed to the steel ones we use, even the suppliers who are making steel teaspoons will look at making ceramic teaspoons because that is what is being bought at a higher price. So they are trying to move towards where the money is. Okay. So if the price is higher, sellers are willing to supply more of that because they can make more money out of it. Whereas with buyers, if the price is higher, then they're less interested in it. Okay. So these are your graphs for supply and demand. You see on your x-axis, that's your quantity, and then your price is on your y. So if you think about graphs back in high school, and this would be your Cartesian plane, that would be the y-axis, and that would be the x, all right? So at the corner there, that would be your 0, okay? So there, where the price is lower, so at this level, you have demand, the quantity being very high. However, when the price is high, look at where quantity is, the quantity demanded. So where these two graphs meet with supply, so what I just explained with supply. So suppliers, if they can sell it for, let's say, R1 here, they will make like one of it, whatever, just small. But as the price increases, you can see their willingness to supply also increases. So this is at a very high price there, and they're also willing to give more output so that they can sell it. So where these ones meet, supply and demand. So you find that they want to supply this much, but the market shrinks as they move that way. The demand starts moving that way. So this is the optimum price where you can sell it for, where you have as much supply as the demand. So where they need, that is your optimum. That's where you should always aim to be, because as soon as you move this way, you can see the demand graph starts moving away. So this gap just keeps on widening. So here, that's your equilibrium. That's where the price at which sellers are willing to sell and the price at which buyers are willing to buy sort of meets. Okay. So if for whatever reason there's a shift in demand, so think about an improvement in the economy. If people are gainfully employed and they're earning more, their ability and willingness to buy would increase. So obviously, the demand curve, well, not the demand curve, it's a graph. The demand line shifts that way. So again, you find that your equilibrium moves, because then they can afford more. So you're no longer at equilibrium at this point here. You're at equilibrium there. However, if for whatever reason supply were to shrink your equilibrium, so supply would, if supply were to move this way down, your equilibrium would be here. But if supply moves that way, so it moves up, then your equilibrium would also change. It becomes a bit tricky for me to teach this, or at least facilitate it online. It's not as easy as when I do it in class. I don't know how to do interactive graphs yet on the system. So this is why. So if for whatever reason the graphs don't make sense to you, please just let me know. I'll find a better way to explain them. Okay. So again, it is the same thing, that shift. If supply shifts that way and increases, your equilibrium moves. Your point of equilibrium. Nobisa, you seem to be struggling with connection, eh? You're in and out of the class. I hope you can find a point where it just stabilizes, because I cannot imagine what the lecture is like for you. Then you have costs and benefits. So think about when you want to spend money on something and then you look at its benefit to you. So you look at the total cost versus the expected rewards of undertaking or doing something. So this happens in construction quite a lot, but we're not there yet. We'll speak about it when we do feasibility studies, and hopefully these things that I'm telling you about, demand and supply, will start to make sense. So if you were given, let's say, 250,000 or access to it, and like, do you want to start a business or would you rather pursue a degree? So you look at the cost and like, okay, 3 years at UJ, 3-year degree, how much is that going to cost me? What is the reward if I start a business, or if I invest this money elsewhere? What is, so that you look at how much it's going to cost you and what the expected reward is, and you decide if it's worth it. So again, it's the same with investing. If you're going to put money into a project or into a development, you want to know after how long can I make returns, and how much are the returns? Is it worth it, or should I just abandon? So obviously, if the benefit outweighs the cost, then the decision will be to go ahead. If the cost outweighs the benefit, then you're going to run it at a loss. So maybe just abandon mission once and for all. Then there's economic incentives, which would explain how the operation of supply and demand would encourage producers to supply goods that consumers want, and consumers to sort of conserve on scarce resources. So when the demand for goods increases, the market price of that good rises, and that's because there's more people asking for it. And then producers have an incentive to produce more of that good because they can receive a higher price for it. Then you have your economic indicators. So this is a piece of information that is usually used on a macroeconomic scale by analysts to interpret current or future investment possibilities. So which direction we should take, what government should be investing in, that sort of thing. The indicators will also assist in judging the overall health of an economy. If the economy is not doing so well.
He prescribed
Apologies.
Not a problem. So the indicators that are used are usually your consumer price index, your gross domestic product, and then your unemployment figures. So you see they look at the consumer price index when they're talking about inflation and stuff like that. GDP would speak to what the country is producing, and making. They assist in sort of predicting future economic conditions that will move markets and guide investment decisions. So you sort of know what to do and how to move. So CPI, like I said, it's a benchmark for measuring inflation. So what they do is they use a basket that is representative of the goods and services in the economy. So they use the same type of goods every year. So for instance, let's say initially they would go into a supermarket and take a basket of goods. They're like bread, oil, milk, peanut butter, blah, 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 and say, okay, how much do they cost? Like 450 for this basket. A year later, we take exactly the same basket and then we say, how much does it cost? Oh, 520. So how much have we moved from what it was last year to? So that is how they do it. That's how they determine that CPI. Then gross domestic product is that broad measure of a country's economic performance. So we sort of give a monetary measure to everything, all the final goods and services that are produced in a specific period by a country or by countries, if you. So we would look at goods and services produced in South Africa, let's say between April 2025 and the end of March 2026. And that would be what is our GDP, and then we say, is it good or is it bad? Using that. And then we look at employment data. This is also by Stats SA. They would look at unemployment measure or unemployment indicators. So this looks at the number of people who are willing and able to work but do not have a job, and are actively seeking one. So as a percent of the labor force. So we would not include children in unemployment rates. Okay, they are not employable. They're not, they should be elsewhere. We don't look at retirees. They would. So you look at the labor force. What age range are people who are considered to be in the labor force? How many of them are willing and able to work? Okay, and how many of them are actively looking for a job, but there is no job for them? Okay. So generally, when GDP declines, unemployment rate rises. So remember, GDP speaks to the goods and services that we produce in a country. So if we were making bricks and output was 5,000 bricks per week, right? That means we would need more hands to get that done. However, if then our production falls to only 2,500 bricks per week, that means we have to get rid of some of the labor force because they have no work and you can't afford to pay them. So obviously, if our GDP declines, then unemployment rate rises because then more people are out of work because we're producing less or we're providing less services because then you need human resources to do these things. So if you're producing fewer goods and services, you need fewer workers. When GDP increases, then the unemployment rate drops, we employ more people. So if the GDP grows, that means inflation will also increase because somehow we have spending power. So again, suppliers can increase their prices because then there's higher demand, or maybe there's, the demand now outstrips supply because a lot of us can afford something. So all developments that you will see, they will arise from a consumer demand that is driven by opportunities and preferences. And your opportunities would be governed by consumption and affordability possibilities. And preference speaks to what the client likes. Okay. So, like I said, me getting from my house to work, I just need transport. So, whether it's going to be a Corolla or a Rolls Royce, that will speak to affordability and preference. Okay. Demand will, however, always be dictated by the economy. Hence, it is important that property economic issues are understood. So we will look at property market cycles, demand and supply of property, and how the economy affects the feasibility of a project, or what is the impact of the economy on the feasibility of a project. So if there's a huge need for residential accommodation, that is what developers will supply. They will look at building blocks of flats or building, those townhouses or freestanding houses like as a Cosmopolitan does. So again, those opportunities would be governed by affordability. How many people can afford houses? What sort of houses? So the sort of houses that they will supply in a particular area is because they believe that the demographic that would live in this area is the people who would afford these type of houses that come at these prices. Okay, so when you look at the development process, okay, from a developer's perspective, there's that initial stage where developer thinks this area needs a hotel. So we had a while back, long time ago, we had a client who wanted to build a hotel in Sanin, and he wanted us to sort of look at it. And when we were talking, he was saying that in December, quite a lot of people who are originally from Sanin and live in Joburg or some in Cape Town come home for the holiday, but then accommodation is an issue and we would prefer to stay at our hotel, right? So then he wanted to build this hotel to cater for that need. And one of the things we discussed with him was, okay, fine. So what happens to the hotel? Because December is really like 2 weeks because it only starts after the 14th, right? And then around the 5th of January, it's over. So what happens throughout the year? Can the hotel be sustainable? I'm gonna ask that you mute yourselves, please. So that's that initial planning stage where you're thinking, can this be done? And also, would there be funding for it? And once you've established that, okay, there's more benefit to this development, there's more benefit to me building this hotel than what it will cost me, then you think, let me acquire the land. Once you've acquired the land, then you develop the land. So this would be you getting all the necessary licenses, getting services to the land, and then you construct the buildings. You can't start building when you do not have access to water, roads, like your general infrastructure, electricity, sewer line, that sort of thing. Okay, so that would you would think about when you are on the developing the land stage. Then you construct the buildings, and then marketing and leasing the space. So this is in the book. However, you can't leave marketing until too late. So from the onset, when you develop the land, you have to be responding to a need. The type of hotel you're building, the type of building you're constructing, it should respond to a need that is there in the market. You can't construct buildings and then hope that there is a need at something. You first establish that there is a need for something, and then you respond to that need. Okay, and then you can lease the space. And stage 6 would be setting up a property management and maintenance system. Again, these stages would not happen in chronological order. You find that they become simultaneous. So already when we plan, we're already thinking, how is this property going to be managed? Who's going to be responsible for maintenance? And we take it from there. So it's not like you will do the one and follow with the next, no. So you can do them simultaneously. Even though when we list them, it's almost like you have to wait for the one to finish for the next stage to start. So there are different types of feasibility studies. You look at the socioeconomic feasibility. So if you look at the objectives of the developer, for instance, let's say the developer is a government entity. When the Department of Health builds hospitals and clinics, it's social benefit more than anything, because we don't pay for the services we get at public clinics. So it's not like government is going to do a study and say, okay, how much money are we going to make out of this clinic? It responds to a social need. Okay. So you look at that from a socio-economic perspective. Is it going to contribute to the social well-being of the area where you're doing this thing? Also, from an economic perspective, does it contribute anything? Physical and legal feasibility. Can what you want be done? Is it physically possible? Okay, so it can be built. All right, you don't want to build a hotel in water. Okay, fine. So it can be built. It's a piece of land, it's solid. what are the legalities around it? What if it's a protected area, a nature reserve, therefore you can't build in it? What is the environmental impact of your development? So you look at the legalities surrounding. So you look at, is this legally feasible? Or is it going to cost more for me to get this development going, in terms of legal costs and the market feasibility? So you look at the market and see if the market would be responsive. Is there a need for what you want to provide? And if not, then don't do it. Because if there's no need for something, then people are not going to buy it. Okay. So again, when you think an apartment block, those small two-bedroom apartments, generally the developers are targeting young families, people who are starting out in life, just gotten a job, you're starting out, you haven't made your money yet, recently got married, young family. So those houses work. And then eventually when they start making money, they move out of the two-bedroom flat to buy a bigger house. So again, that's your market feasibility. So, okay, fine. If you're in an area with an aging population, it would be more appealing if you developed an old age home, because that's where those people are headed. But if you have a lot of young people who are starting out in life, then you look at what are the salary scales in that area. Okay, what can they afford? And then you provide accommodation that's within their reach and will still make you rich, as well. So that's what you determine in your financial feasibility, to say, if I develop a building, how much do I want to make as a return? After how long do I want to break even and start seeing money? So that is what it is about. A lot of the socioeconomic feasibility, it's a lot of reading. You can read through that. You can read through the legal feasibility, market feasibility. What we focus on mostly, it's the financial feasibility or the viability study. That is mostly what this course is about. And this is why I wanted to include a commercial property valuation in the second semester. Okay, so you can read through these notes. This is available on Moodle. I did not receive any email saying you can't access the notes, so my assumption is that you can. If not, I will just wait for your emails. Are there any questions? Okay, in the absence of questions, I am going to stop recording and wish you a very good evening. And again, I apologize for starting